History is full of things people once considered completely normal, and then somehow civilization survived long enough to realize, actually, maybe children should not play with uranium. Today, we are looking at 32 old habits, trends, treatments, games, and everyday ideas that were once acceptable, fashionable, or even responsible. Some are funny, some are horrifying, and a few make you wonder how our species made it this far. 1. College students have always treated dignity like an optional elective, but in 1939 they reached a special kind of nonsense with the goldfish swallowing fad. It supposedly began when Harvard freshman Lothrop Withington Jr. swallowed a live goldfish for a bet, then allegedly sent it down with a potato, because apparently the fish needed a side dish. Newspapers grabbed the story, and suddenly, campuses across America turned into competitive seafood disasters. Students tried to break each other's records, with claims climbing from one poor fish to hundreds, depending on how much you trust college boys and publicity. Universities threatened punishment. Animal welfare groups protested. Massachusetts lawmakers even considered a bill to save goldfish from becoming dorm room snacks. One senator called it an insult to the fish, which feels fair. Then World War II arrived, and young men found bigger problems than swallowing aquarium pets for applause. 2. In 18th century England, being rich was not enough. You needed land, gardens, fake ruins, tasteful melancholy, and apparently, a professionally miserable man living in your shrubbery. These were ornamental hermits, actual people hired to sit around on wealthy estates in caves, grottos, or carefully designed little huts, looking dirty, wise, and emotionally unavailable. The ideal hermit wore rough robes, avoided haircuts, skipped nail trimming, and generally gave guests the feeling that deep philosophy was happening near the hedges. Some contracts lasted 7 years and required the hermit to remain silent, stay on the property, and absolutely not ruin the vibe by looking clean. The pay could be excellent, but many were fired for sneaking to taverns or bathing, which was literally against the aesthetic. It was basically hiring a human garden ornament with depression. Rich people were not bored. They were aggressively weird. 3. In the Middle Ages, drinking water could be less refreshing beverage and more intestinal roulette. Rivers collected waste, wells were easily contaminated, and clean municipal water systems were not exactly waiting politely at the tap. So many people drank small beer, a weak brew usually around 1 or 2% alcohol, because brewing made it safer than whatever mysterious swamp liquid was nearby. This was not party culture. This was hydration with foam. Workers drank it during the day. Monks drank it in monasteries. Children drank it too because, apparently, medieval parenting included giving toddlers beer and calling it responsible. The alcohol level was low, so people were not collapsing drunk at breakfast, just lightly fermented by lunch. Still, it is wild to remember that one of civilization's greatest upgrades was not a crown, a castle, or a sword. It was water that did not try to destroy your stomach. 4. Eating dinner while sitting upright in a chair seems normal now, but to ancient Greeks and Romans, that was not the elegant option. Fancy people reclined while dining, stretched out on couches called clini or triclinia, leaning on one elbow and eating with the other hand like they were hosting a banquet and a nap at the same time. Formal dining rooms were built for this, with couches arranged around a central table so guests could lounge, snack, gossip, and silently judge each other's sandals. Reclining showed status. It meant you had leisure, servants, and no urgent need to shovel food into your mouth before returning to manual labor. Sitting upright was for workers, children, and people without luxury couches. They even thought reclining helped digestion, which modern doctors would probably answer with a very tired sigh. So yes, historically speaking, eating while lying down was not lazy, it was classy. 5. From the 1920s into the 1950s, shoe stores offered a thrilling little machine that let children stare directly at their own foot bones. It was called a shoe-fitting fluoroscope, and it was basically a wooden cabinet with an X-ray tube inside. You placed your feet in the bottom, peered through the viewer, and watched your skeleton toes wiggle inside the shoes. Parents thought it proved the shoes fit. Kids thought it was magic. Salesmen thought it made them look like medical scientists instead of people trying to sell loafers. The tiny problem was radiation. The machines exposed customers, especially children, to doses far higher than anyone would allow today, and kids often used them repeatedly for fun while adults shopped. Store employees got even more exposure. Some places did not ban them until the 1970s. Nothing says back-to-school sale like unnecessary radiation. 6. Victorian beauty culture had many terrible ideas, but the tapeworm diet deserves its own little throne in the Museum of Human Madness. The pitch was horrifyingly simple. Swallow a pill containing tapeworm eggs, let the parasite grow inside you, and then lose weight while it steals part of your food. Easy slimming, no discipline, just a roommate in your intestines. Advertisements really did promote these miracle pills because apparently parasite infestation sounded better when printed in elegant fonts. The reality was exactly as disgusting as you think. Tapeworms can grow to ridiculous lengths, cause malnutrition, digestive damage, organ problems, and with certain species, dangerous cysts in the brain. Some people died chasing thinness through deliberate infection. The practice was eventually banned, but not before society proved that if you shame people hard enough, some will literally invite worms into their bodies. Diet culture did not become unhinged recently. It arrived unhinged. 7. Public executions in medieval and early modern Europe were not quiet moral ceremonies where everyone pondered justice with solemn faces. They were crowd events. Thousands of people showed up. Vendors sold snacks and drinks. Families brought children, because nothing says quality parenting like scaffold-side seating. Rooms with a view of the execution could be rented for premium prices, turning death into a very grim balcony experience. The condemned were often expected to speak, repent, or perform bravery, and the crowd judged the final act like theater critics with worse hygiene. Pamphlets describing the crime and execution appeared almost immediately afterward. In England, pieces of hanging rope could be sold as lucky charms. In France, executioners sometimes sold blood. People defended the whole spectacle as morally educational, because apparently trauma was a teaching tool. Public executions lasted in much of Europe until the 19th century, proving that history's idea of family entertainment was deeply alarming. 8. After Marie Curie's work helped reveal radium in 1898, people reacted to this mysterious glowing substance with the caution of drunk raccoons in a laboratory. They put radium in toothpaste, cosmetics, chocolate, medical tonics, and even products no one should ever mention at dinner. The most infamous was Radithor, a radioactive drink sold as liquid sunshine that supposedly boosted energy, masculinity, mood, and basically anything else marketers could squeeze into a label. Wealthy industrialist Eben Byers became its most famous victim. He drank nearly 1,400 bottles over several years, convinced it was helping him. Then his body began collapsing in the most terrifying possible way. His jaw deteriorated, his bones were damaged, and he died in 1932 from radiation poisoning. Decades later, his remains were still radioactive. The age of radium wellness was a perfect reminder that humanity's first reaction to a new discovery is often, "Can we drink it?" 9. Mid-20th century commercial flying was less like modern air travel, and more like being trapped inside a luxury ashtray with wings. Smoking on planes was not just allowed, it was expected. Passengers smoked before takeoff, during meals, after meals, and whenever the cabin needed a thicker layer of regret. Flight attendants handed out cigarettes. Ashtrays were built into armrests. The air could get so smoky that window seat probably meant nothing because you were viewing the world through a tobacco fog. Non-smoking sections existed later, but they were basically decorative. Everyone shared the same air, so sitting in non-smoking meant you were slightly farther from the person turning your lungs into a fireplace. Restrictions did not seriously arrive until the late 1980s, and full bans took even longer. So yes, people were hotboxing airplanes within living memory. Compared to that, today's panic over airplane bathroom vaping feels almost adorable. 10. For centuries, schools treated physical punishment not as abuse, but as classroom management with extra bruising. Teachers in many countries were allowed, expected, and sometimes encouraged to discipline students with canes, rulers, paddles, leather straps, and whatever else looked educational in a terrifying way. Children could be hit for talking, forgetting homework, getting answers wrong, fidgeting, being late, or simply irritating an adult who had access to a stick. Hands, backsides, and sometimes faces became part of the lesson plan. In Britain, caning in state schools was not banned until 1986, which is far too recent for something that sounds like it belongs next to candlelit manuscripts. In parts of the United States, school paddling has remained legal into recent years. The phrase, "spare the rod, spoil the child," was taken with absolute seriousness. Many adults alive today remember being struck by teachers like it was just another subject, right between math and lifelong distrust. 11. Today, elevators are boring in the best possible way. You press a button, the doors close, and the machine politely delivers you to the correct floor without asking for human talent. Early elevators were not so relaxing. They often required a trained operator who controlled speed and stopping with a lever or crank, basically piloting a vertical box full of anxious people. The elevator did not automatically line up with the floor. The operator had to stop it precisely, by eye, at exactly the right moment. Miss by a little, and passengers had to step over a gap or climb awkwardly out like they were escaping a mechanical trap. Trips, falls, caught limbs, and crushed fingers were a real hazard. Elevator operator was an actual skilled job requiring training, not just someone wearing a nice hat. Automatic elevators eventually wiped out many of those jobs, but they also spared humanity thousands of mangled ankles. 12. Early cars were built with a charming belief that passengers should simply try not to die. Dashboards were hard metal, sometimes decorated with sharp chrome details, because apparently the inside of a vehicle needed more stabbing potential. Steering columns were solid rods aimed straight at the driver's chest. Windshields could shatter into knife-like shards. Seatbelts existed, but many drivers saw them as insulting. Wearing one suggested you did not trust the driver, the car, fate, or possibly masculinity itself. When Ford offered optional seatbelts in 1956, some customers reacted as if the company had confessed, "Yes, our cars are death traps." Sales actually suffered. Mandatory seatbelt laws arrived much later in many places and were met with angry protests about freedom. People genuinely defended their right to become high-speed projectiles during a crash. History is full of noble struggles for liberty, and then there is this. 13. Early 20th century asthma treatment followed a logic that sounds reasonable for about 3 seconds, and then becomes medically cursed. Doctors knew asthma attacks narrowed the airways, so they wanted something that might open them. Certain plant compounds could act as bronchodilators. So pharmaceutical companies sold medicated cigarettes for asthma. Yes, people who could not breathe were told to inhale smoke on purpose. Brands like Asthmador and Potter's asthma cigarettes were advertised through pharmacies and backed by doctors because nothing says respiratory care like burning herbs into compromised lungs. Some formulas contained stramonium, belladonna, and other ingredients that could briefly relax airways, giving temporary relief. The long-term effect, however, was exactly what you would expect from telling sick lungs to attend a smoke party. The practice survived astonishingly late, into the 20th century's supposedly modern medical era. Medical history is basically a museum of smart people being wrong with confidence. 14. Before cheap alarm clocks became common, industrial workers faced a very practical nightmare. How do you wake up for a brutal early factory shift if you cannot afford a clock? The answer was the knocker-upper, which sounds fake, but was a real job in Britain. These people walked through dark streets before dawn, carrying long sticks, bamboo poles, or sometimes pea shooters. They tapped bedroom windows or fired dried peas at the glass until the customer woke up and proved it by waving or moving around. They did not just knock once and leave. No, this was human snooze button harassment with a route map. Some knocker-uppers kept working into the 1950s in industrial towns, meaning this profession overlapped with the age of television. The best part is the obvious question. Who woke up the person whose entire job was waking up other people? History offers no satisfying answer, which feels suspicious. 15. Indoor plumbing is so normal now that we forget most humans lived without it for almost all of history. The chamber pot was the standard bathroom technology, a bowl kept under the bed, used at night, and dealt with in the morning. Dealt with often meant dumping the contents out a window into the street below because urban planning apparently needed more surprises from above. Cities developed filthy runoff channels, open drains, and smells so powerful they could probably qualify as architecture. Edinburgh was famous for residents shouting "Garde l'eau," meaning watch out for the water, before launching waste into public space. Workers called night soilmen later collected human waste from cesspools and hauled it away, a job title that deserves both respect and several showers. Romantic period dramas rarely include this part, because it is hard to maintain longing eye contact when the street outside is basically soup made of sewage. 16. Today, Lysol is what you spray on bathroom surfaces when you want germs to experience a small apocalypse. But in the early 20th century, it was marketed to women as a supposedly gentle product for intimate hygiene, which is horrifying once you remember it was a harsh disinfectant. The advertisements were coded in delicate euphemisms about married happiness and feminine cleanliness, politely implying that a woman's entire marriage might collapse if she did not chemically attack herself. The formula at the time was much more caustic than modern versions and caused burns, infections, poisoning, and in some cases, death. Medical reports documented hundreds of Lysol poisonings by 1911, yet the ads kept going for decades. Many people also understood the marketing as coded language for contraception, because open discussion of birth control was restricted or taboo. So instead of honest medical information, women got shame, secrecy, and disinfectant. A beautiful system, if designed by villains. 17. Medieval England had a tax system flexible enough to ask the important question, why pay rent in coins when you can pay in eels? The Domesday Book, compiled in 1086, records properties where annual dues were paid partly or entirely in eels, sometimes by the thousands or even tens of thousands. This was not a joke currency. Eels were abundant in marshes and rivers, nutritious, easy to preserve by smoking, and useful enough that landlords, monasteries, and even the crown accepted them. Ely, a town in the Fenlands, was so connected to eels that its name is tied to them, and its obligations involved serious, slippery fish accounting. Somewhere, a medieval official had to count baskets of wriggling eels and write the numbers into a formal record like this was a normal workday. Bureaucracy has never been glamorous, but eel tax auditor may be one of its dampest chapters. 18. Lawn darts, sold under the cheerful name yarts, were family entertainment designed by someone who looked at children and thought, what if the backyard had falling spears? The game involved throwing heavy metal-tipped darts with plastic fins into the air, so they would land inside a target ring on the grass. The key detail is that they landed point first, near people, during barbecues. These things weighed enough to hit with frightening force, and yes, they could penetrate a skull. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, families treated them as wholesome outdoor fun, because apparently nothing bonded generations like aerial metal spikes. Between 1978 and 1988, lawn darts sent thousands of people to emergency rooms, and 3 children died. The Consumer Product Safety Commission finally banned them in 1988 after years of warnings. Somewhere in a garage, a vintage set may still be waiting like a cursed heirloom. 19. When photography first spread in the 19th century, getting a picture taken was expensive, slow, and rare. Many people might only be photographed once or twice in their lives. So when someone died, Victorian families sometimes saw the new technology as a final chance to preserve their face. Postmortem photography became a real industry. Photographers came to homes, arranged the deceased with stands, chairs, props, or family members, and tried to make them look peaceful, lifelike, or at least less obviously gone. Children appeared often because infant mortality was tragically high. and sometimes these were the only images families ever had of them. In some finished photographs, eyes were added or enhanced to make the person appear awake. To modern viewers, it can feel deeply unsettling. To Victorian families, it was often an act of love, grief, and remembrance, using the most miraculous visual technology available. 20. Children's chemistry sets used to be less educational toy and more small box of pending lawsuits. Early 20th century kits could include chemicals that would make a modern safety inspector quietly sit down and breathe into a paper bag. Acids, nitrates, cyanide compounds, and ingredients that could be used to make real explosions. The famous Gilbert U-238 atomic energy lab from 1950 went even further, giving children actual uranium ore samples and a Geiger counter so they could measure radiation like tiny, unsupervised nuclear interns. The instructions encouraged experimentation with a level of adult supervision, best described as, "Good luck, Timmy." What is remarkable is that safety was not always the main reason these kits faded. Some were expensive, and many children simply found them less exciting than newer toys. Our ancestors loved saying kids were tougher back then. Sure, they were also casually handing them uranium. 21. Before forensic science, medieval courts sometimes tried to solve legal questions with food, religion, and panic. One method was the corsned, also called trial by blessed bread or trial by cake. A priest blessed a piece of bread or cheese. The accused had to eat it, and if they choked or could not swallow, that meant God had exposed their guilt. If it went down smoothly, congratulations. Apparently, divine justice had cleared your name. The problem is obvious to anyone who has ever tried swallowing dry food while terrified. A person accused of a serious crime, sweating, dehydrated, and facing possible execution might choke because they were human, not because heaven had issued a verdict. A famous legend says Earl Godwin of Wessex died in 1053 after choking on blessed bread while denying involvement in murder. Whether that proves guilt, bad timing, or a dangerously dry snack remains open to debate. 22. Victorian and Edwardian fashion loved birds so much that it killed them by the millions and then wore them on hats. Not just feathers, entire birds. Women's hats could feature taxidermied hummingbirds, owls, parrots, egrets, wings, heads, glass eyes, and sometimes little fake nesting scenes, because nothing says elegance like a small wildlife crime balanced above your forehead. By 1900, the millinery trade was killing enormous numbers of birds each year, especially in the United States, and some species were pushed dangerously close to extinction. The snowy egret suffered badly because its delicate breeding plumage was fashionable. The backlash helped spark early conservation activism, including women who organized against what they called murderous millinery. This movement helped lead to stronger bird protections, including the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. So yes, one major conservation fight began because high society looked at birds and thought, cute, make it a hat. 23. The lobotomy is one of the darkest examples of a medical treatment gaining prestige while causing catastrophic harm. Developed in the 1930s and popular through the 1950s, it involved cutting or damaging connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex in the hope of treating mental illness. Walter Freeman became its most notorious promoter, traveling across the United States in a van later nicknamed the lobotomobile. His signature method involved inserting an instrument through the eye socket and disrupting brain tissue with horrifying speed. Patients included people with severe psychiatric conditions, but also rebellious teenagers, depressed women, and individuals whose problems were treated as inconveniences. He performed thousands of lobotomies, including on children. Some patients became calmer, but many were left severely disabled, emotionally flattened, incontinent, or dependent on lifelong care. Rosemary Kennedy, sister of President John F. Kennedy, was lobotomized at 23 and never recovered her independence. Freeman lost his license only in 1967. 24. In 18th century England, divorce was technically available, in the same way a private island is technically available if you have enough money. It required parliament, lawyers, public humiliation, and a fortune, so ordinary people found a grimly theatrical workaround: wife selling. A husband would bring his wife to a market or tavern, often with a rope or halter, and publicly auction her to another man. On the surface, it looks purely horrific, and sometimes it was. But many recorded cases were prearranged. The wife already had a preferred buyer, often her lover or future partner, and the spectacle functioned as a public community-approved separation. Everyone watched, everyone pretended the ritual meant something legally binding, and the couple moved on because official divorce was out of reach. It was not law, but it could work socially. The last recorded wife sale in England happened in 1913, which is much too close to the age of airplanes for comfort. 25. Ancient Egyptian medicine was a strange combination of impressive skill and treatments that sound like someone lost a bet in a temple. Egyptian doctors could set broken bones, perform surgeries, treat wounds, and create useful remedies from plants and minerals. They also believed that a live dung beetle placed in the ear could help cure deafness or ear pain. The scarab beetle had deep religious symbolism, connected to rebirth, the sun, and divine cycles, so in their worldview, using it medically was not random. It had spiritual logic. Unfortunately, spiritual logic does not make bug in ear a good clinical plan. Medical papyri include prescriptions involving beetles, animal substances, fats, garlic, and even dung-based ingredients for different ailments. Some Egyptian treatments were genuinely effective, which makes the bizarre ones stand out even more. Their medicine was advanced for its time, but occasionally it still looked at a patient and said, "Have we tried sacred insects?" 26. Parenting advice. In the 1930s, sometimes looked at an apartment window several floors above the street and saw opportunity. Baby cages were exactly what the name threatens. Wire cages attached to the outside of apartment windows so infants could be placed inside for fresh air and sunlight. The baby dangled outside the building like a tiny human air conditioner, while traffic and pedestrians passed below. This was not viewed as obvious madness by everyone at the time. Some childcare experts promoted fresh air as essential for healthy development, especially in crowded cities where families lacked gardens or balconies. The cages were patented, advertised, manufactured, and sold to parents who apparently thought, "My infant needs nature, but only the terrifying vertical kind." They were used most famously in places like London. They never became hugely popular everywhere, which is reassuring. Even history occasionally looks at itself and whispers, "Maybe not." 27. Medieval trial by ordeal was what happened when courts ran out of evidence and decided to let pain do the paperwork. One common version required the accused to carry a red-hot iron or plunge a hand into boiling water to retrieve an object. The wound was then bandaged and checked days later. If it healed cleanly, God had declared the person innocent. If it festered, guilt was proven. This was considered justice, not a medieval team-building exercise gone wrong. The system faded after 1215, when the church withdrew support for ordeals, partly because theologians questioned whether humans had the right to force God into courtroom demonstrations. Some historians suspect priests may have influenced outcomes by controlling how hot the iron was or how the ritual was handled, especially if they believed someone was innocent. So even divine justice apparently needed backstage management. Nothing says sacred law like suspiciously adjustable burning metal. 28. Medieval Europe did not stop at putting humans on trial. It also dragged animals into court, because apparently justice needed to include pigs, rats, and the occasional rooster with suspicious vibes. If a pig killed a child, it might be arrested, jailed, assigned legal representation, tried before a judge, and publicly executed if convicted. In 1386, a pig in France was reportedly hanged for killing an infant. In 1474, a rooster was burned for supposedly laying an egg, which people interpreted as witchcraft because biology had apparently called in sick. Crop-destroying pests like rats, weevils, and locusts could be summoned to court or even excommunicated by church authorities. The animals rarely attended, which courts treated as contempt instead of the obvious fact that rats do not read legal notices. Defense lawyers sometimes argued instinct. It rarely helped. Medieval law was not just strict, it was committed to the bit. 29. Renaissance. Venice knew how to turn fashion into a balance test with financial consequences. Chopines were platform shoes worn by elite women, often made from wood or cork, and some rose to absurd heights of 15, 30, or even 50 centimeters. These were not shoes for walking. These were shoes for announcing that walking was now a group project. Women wearing tall chopines often needed servants on both sides to keep them upright, because every step carried the drama of a small architectural collapse. But that was exactly the point. The height showed wealth, status, and impracticality so extreme it became its own language. You were rich enough to wear shoes you could not use and employ people whose job was to prevent you from face-planting into a canal. Laws eventually tried to limit the height because injuries were common. Fashion ignored safety, as usual. The only difference is that Venice made it taller. 30. When parcel post began in the United States in 1913, the rules about what could be mailed were loose enough for parents to ask a question no modern postal worker wants to hear. Can we ship the child? For a short time, a few families essentially did. Train tickets could be expensive, postage could be cheaper, and some children were sent through the mail system under the watch of postal employees, usually on short trips to relatives. One famous case involved a little girl in Ohio sent to her grandmother with postage attached for a tiny fee. She was not stuffed in a box, to be clear, but she traveled under postal supervision, which is still insane enough. The United States Postal Service eventually banned the mailing of humans, because apparently that needed to be written down. For a brief, glorious period, the mail could include letters, packages, and one confused child going to grandma's house. 31. The mid-20th century relationship between doctors and cigarettes was not exactly cautious. It was more like a smoky group project between medicine and marketing. Doctors smoked in clinics, hospitals, and sometimes while speaking to patients about health, which is a level of irony that should require licensing. Cigarette companies placed advertisements featuring physicians endorsing brands as smooth, mild, or gentle on the throat. The famous slogan, "More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette," came from surveys influenced by free cigarette samples given to doctors, because apparently scientific rigor smelled like tobacco. Pregnant women were sometimes told smoking might reduce stress or help control weight. Hospitals had smoking lounges. Patients could smoke in beds. Even people recovering from lung procedures were not always protected from the habit. The United States Surgeon General's 1964 report linking smoking to cancer shocked many people, which is impressive considering the clues were literally in the air. 32. Today, cocaine is tightly controlled and associated with ruined careers, prison sentences, and the phrase, "What were you thinking?" But in the late 19th century, it was treated almost like a miracle ingredient. Pharmacies sold it. Doctors prescribed it. Toothache? Cocaine? Exhausted? Cocaine tonic. Baby teething? Some products used cocaine on gums because nothing says childcare like narcotics before nap time. Cocaine wines and tonics promised energy, confidence, and relief from nearly every complaint marketers could invent. Sigmund Freud became famously enthusiastic about the drug, recommending it in writings and to people around him with the confidence of a man discovering both psychoanalysis and a terrible group chat. Coca-Cola's original formula contained coca leaf extract, though the company later changed course. It took years of addiction, medical harm, and public concern before governments seriously restricted cocaine. Humanity really does like testing new substances by putting them in everything first and asking questions later. So, which totally normal thing did we miss? And do not give me something weak like people wrote letters. I mean the truly cursed stuff. The habit, product, medical advice, toy, punishment, or social trend that makes you question the entire timeline. Drop it in the comments, and if your answer is disturbing enough, it belongs in part 2. Hit like if at least one of these made your ancestors look like unpaid crash test dummies, and subscribe for more historical nonsense that somehow really happened.